The first Krell missile streaked through space toward the Valiant Dawn, and Greg's fingers danced across his tactical console with practiced speed. He had trained for situations like this even though nobody expected a single ship to face 12 enemies at once. The defensive systems came alive and Interceptor missiles launched to meet the incoming threats, while point defense lasers tracked and fired at anything that got too close. Jake watched his tactical display and calculated angles in his head. The Krell were coming at him in a standard attack formation that was designed to overwhelm a single target, with firepower from multiple directions. It was effective against most species who fought by the rules that the Galactic Council considered civilized. But humans had learned warfare in a different school, and they had thousands of years of experience fighting against bad odds. "Sophie, give me everything the engines can handle." Jake called down to engineering. "I need speed and I need it now." Sophie's voice came back through the communication system and she sounded almost excited. "Already pushing past safety limits, Captain. I can give you another 15% if you don't mind voiding the warranty." "Do it," Jake said, and he felt the ship surge forward with more acceleration than the designers had intended. The Valiant Dawn wasn't running away, though. She was diving straight toward the Krell formation at an angle that would take her through a gap between two of their warships. Greg understood what his captain was doing, and he adjusted his targeting solutions accordingly. Forward weapons locked on the lead ship, firing. The Valiant Dawn's main cannon spoke and coherent beams of energy crossed the distance between ships in an instant. The Krell warship's shields flared bright as they absorbed the hits, but Jake wasn't trying to destroy them with that first shot. He was testing their strength and learning what he needed to know. "Their shields are standard military grade," Amy reported from her science station. "Nothing special, but they're strong enough to take a beating." The Valiant Dawn shot through the gap in the Krell formation before they could adjust their positions to close it. Human ships were built for speed and maneuverability, while Krell vessels relied more on heavy armor and powerful weapons. Jake used that difference now as he spun his ship in a tight arc that would have torn apart a Krell warship, but only stressed the Valiant Dawn's inertial dampeners. "Target their engines," Jake ordered. "Krell ships are slower to turn. Hit them where it hurts." Greg fired again, and this time the shots were aimed with surgical precision at the engine pods of the nearest Krell warship. The beams punched through shields that were designed to protect the front and sides of the ship, but weren't as strong at the rear. Explosions blossomed along the Krell ship's engine section, and it began tumbling out of formation. With its thrust systems damaged, Vex. Thor's voice came over the communication channel, and now he sounded angry instead of amused. "You fight without honor, human. Stand and face us properly." Jake didn't bother responding. Honor in combat was a luxury for people who could afford it, and right now he couldn't afford anything except victory. The Valiant Dawn accelerated toward a nearby asteroid field, and Jake saw Greg's eyes widen as he understood the plan. "Captain, flying into that field at this speed is insane," Greg said, but his hands were already adjusting their course to follow his captain's intentions. "The Krell won't expect it," Jake replied. "That makes it the right move." The asteroid field was dense with rocks ranging from pebbles to small mountains drifting in chaotic orbits around each other. Standard Galactic Council doctrine said that ships should avoid such fields during combat because the risks were too high. But humans had been flying through asteroid fields since the early days of their space program, and they had learned to use them as tools rather than obstacles. Amy's sensors tracked thousands of asteroids and fed the data to the navigation system. The Valiant Dawn wove between massive rocks while Krell missiles followed and then detonated against stone instead of shields. Jake pushed his ship through gaps that looked too small and trusted his crew to keep them alive. 3 Krell ships are following us into the field," Greg reported. "The others are trying to circle around." "Good," Jake said. "Fire missiles at grid coordinates Delta 7 and Epsilon 3. Greg looked at those coordinates and saw they were both large asteroids in the path of the pursuing Krell ships. He fired as ordered, and the missiles struck the asteroids with carefully calculated force. The rock shattered into thousands of fragments that spread out in expanding clouds of deadly debris. The Krell ships flew straight into the clouds because they were moving too fast to stop, and their shields lit up like stars as rock fragments hammered against them. 2 of the 3 pursuing ships made it through the debris clouds, but their shields were weakened and their hulls were scarred. The 3rd ship took too much damage and had to break off the pursuit with multiple hull breaches, venting atmosphere into space. That made 4 Krell ships disabled or damaged and 8 still in the fight. The Valiant Dawn burst out of the asteroid field on the far side, and Jake immediately changed course back toward the Veshan transport. The Krell ships that had circled around were waiting for him, but they were spread out now instead of in formation. That was another mistake because it let Jake engage them one or two at a time, instead of facing their combined firepower. Sophie's voice came from engineering with an edge of concern. "Captain, I'm showing stress fractures in the port side structural supports. We've been pushing too hard. Can we keep fighting?" Jake asked. "For now," Sophie said. "But we can't take many direct hits or things will start breaking." Jake nodded even though Sophie couldn't see him. "Understood. Greg, let's make sure they don't hit us then." The next Krell ship came at them firing all weapons, and Greg returned fire while Jake threw the Valiant Dawn into evasive maneuvers that shouldn't have been possible for a ship that size. Energy beams crossed in space and shields flared on both vessels. The Krell ship was bigger and had more weapons, but the human ship was faster and its crew knew how to shoot while moving. Greg targeted the Krell ship's weapon systems and methodically destroyed their cannons one by one. The Krell commander tried to ram the Valiant Dawn in desperation, but Jake saw it coming and dodged at the last moment. The Krell ship overshot and Jake put 3 shots into its bridge section. The enemy vessel went dark and tumbled away with no one left alive to control it. 5 Krell ships were out of the fight now and 7 remained. The odds were getting better, but they were still terrible. Jake's crew was performing miracles, but they were also getting tired and the ship was taking damage. He needed help and he needed it soon. "Amy, get a message to Earth Defense Command," Jake ordered. "Tell them we need reinforcements at our position immediately." Amy worked her console and then shook her head. "Communication is being jammed by the Krell. I can send a tight beam message, but it will take time to punch through their interference." "Do it," Jake said. "And keep trying until you get through." The remaining Krell ships were regrouping now, and Vexthor clearly realized that the single human ship was more dangerous than he had expected. His next attack was more cautious, with ships working in coordinated pairs and maintaining defensive formations. They had learned respect for human capabilities, but that just made them more dangerous. Jake found himself in a deadly dance with 7 warships that wanted him dead. The Valiant Dawn twisted and turned while firing at every opportunity. Greg's targeting solutions became more desperate as ammunition ran low and power reserves drained. Sophie worked frantically in engineering to keep damaged systems running and to repair what she could while combat raged around them. Krell missile got through the point defense and slammed into the Valiant Dawn's port shield. The impact sent shudders through the hull and warning lights flashed on multiple consoles. Sophie reported a power conduit failure and 2 crew members injured in the port weapons section. "Captain, I'm through to Earth Defense Command," Amy said with relief in her voice. "Admiral Helen Carter is responding." Jake pulled up the communication and saw Admiral Carter's stern face on his screen. She was a woman in her 60s with gray hair and sharp blue eyes that had seen more combat than most people could imagine. She looked at the tactical data streaming from the Valiant Dawn and her expression didn't change. "You picked a fight with 12 Krell warships, Captain Morrison?" she asked. "They were threatening Veshan from Treshikai, Admiral," Jake said, and that was all the explanation he needed to give. Admiral Carter was silent for 3 seconds, and then she nodded once. "Understood. Hold your position, Captain. Reinforcements are already en route to your location. They'll be there in 18 minutes. "We'll be here, Admiral," Jake promised, even though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. The communication ended, and Jake looked at his battered ship and tired crew. 18 minutes didn't sound like a long time, but in combat it was an eternity. The Krell were closing in again, and this time they knew what they were facing. "All right, people," Jake said to his crew. "We've got 18 minutes to stay alive. Let's show these Krell what humans can do when we're protecting our friends." The Valiant Dawn charged back into battle, and the crew fought with everything they had left. The 18 minutes felt like 18 hours as the Valiant Dawn fought for survival against 7 Krell warships that were determined to destroy the impudent human vessel. Jake's uniform was soaked with sweat, and his hands gripped the armrests of his command chair hard enough to leave marks. Every member of his crew was pushed beyond their normal limits, but none of them quit or complained because they all understood what they were fighting for. Greg fired the last of their long-range missiles at a Krell ship that was trying to flank them, and the explosion caught the enemy vessels, shields at a weak point. The Krell ship staggered and pulled back with damage to its forward sections, but it wasn't out of the fight. Greg's board showed that they were down to short-range weapons and emergency reserves of power for the main cannons. Ammunition at 15%, Greg reported, and his voice was hoarse from shouting orders to his weapons crews. If this goes on much longer, we'll be throwing rocks at them. Sophie called up from engineering, where she and her team had performed miracles keeping the ship together. Hull integrity at 60%, and we've got fires in sections 7 and 9. I've sealed them off, but we're running out of things I can fix with tape and prayers. Amy's sensor board suddenly lit up with new contacts, and she gasped before announcing what she saw. Captain, I'm reading 8 new ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel. They're human vessels, and they're coming in hot. Jake felt relief wash through him like cold water. The reinforcements had arrived, and they had arrived ready for combat. His tactical display updated to show 8 human warships of various classes spreading out into attack formations. Leading them was a massive battleship that dwarfed everything else in the area, including the Krell vessels. That's the Iron Resolve, Greg said, with something like awe in his voice. Admiral Frank Cooper's flagship. The Iron Resolve was one of humanity's most powerful warships, and it looked like a weapon even when it was just sitting in space. The battleship bristled with gun turrets and missile pods, while its armor plating was thick enough to shrug off hits that would destroy smaller vessels. Beside it came 3 destroyers, 2 frigates, and 2 support cruisers that were already launching fighter craft. A communication channel opened, and Admiral Frank Cooper's face appeared on Jake's screen. The Admiral was an older man with a weathered face and gray hair cut military short. His eyes were the color of steel, and they had seen things that most people couldn't imagine. He had commanded human forces during the first contact wars against the Zendari raiders 15 years ago, and everyone in the fleet knew his reputation. Captain Morrison, this is Admiral Cooper, the man said, and his voice was deep and calm, like he was discussing the weather instead of arriving at a battlefield. Sit tight and let us handle this from here. Understood, Admiral, Jake replied, and he felt the tension start to drain from his shoulders. The Vaishon transport is still intact and holding position near those coordinates. We see them, Cooper said. Good work keeping them safe. Now get your ship clear of the combat zone and patch your wounds. The valiant Dawn limped away from the fighting, while the 8 fresh human warships moved to engage the 7 remaining Krell vessels. Vexthor's voice came over the open communication channels, and now there was uncertainty in his tone, where before there had been only arrogance. This changes nothing, Vexthor declared. You are still outnumbered, and we have reinforcements of our own. Coming from Bloodfang Outpost. Admiral Cooper opened a communication. Channel that broadcast not just to the immediate area but across multiple Galactic Council frequencies so that anyone monitoring this sector would hear his words. His message was calm and measured, but it carried weight like a hammer coming down on an anvil. This is Admiral Frank Cooper of the Earth Defense Fleet, addressing all Krell forces in this sector, he said, and every word was clear and precise. The Veshan people rendered aid to humanity 50 years ago, when we were vulnerable and in desperate need. They asked nothing in return for their kindness, and they expected no payment for saving 20,000 human lives. We do not forget such debts. Jake listened from his damaged bridge as the Admiral continued speaking. Amy had managed to get medical teams working on the injured crew members, and Sophie was coordinating damage control parties throughout the ship. The valiant Dawn was hurt, but she would survive, and that was more than Jake had dared hope for during the darkest moments of the battle. Any force that threatens the Veshan threatens humanity, Admiral Cooper continued, and now his voice carried an edge of steel. Any vessel that attacks them attacks us. This sector is now under human protection, and the Veshan people are under our shield. This is not a request or a negotiation. This is a statement of fact. The Krell ships hesitated, and Jake could imagine Vexthor and his fellow commanders trying to decide what to do. They had come here expecting easy prey, and instead they had found a human hornet's nest. Now they faced 8 warships, including a battleship that could probably destroy all of them by itself if it came to that. You have no authority here, human, Vexthor said, but his earlier confidence was gone. This sector is open space, and we operate under ancient raiding rights recognized by local custom. There are no raiding rights anymore, Admiral Cooper replied, and his tone made it clear he was done with discussion. Not here. Not against the Veshan. Not while humanity draws breath. You have one opportunity to withdraw peacefully. Take it now or face the consequences. Vexthor made his choice, and it was the wrong one. The Krell Dominion does not bow to threats. All ships attack. The 7 Krell warships opened fire on the human fleet, and that was when the galaxy learned what human military doctrine really looked like when applied with full force. The 8 human ships moved with coordination that seemed impossible for vessels that size. They didn't just fight as individual units, but as a single organism, with 8 deadly parts. Captain Lisa Grant commanded the frigate Stormbreaker, and she led 2 other fast attack ships in a maneuver that Jake recognized from advanced tactical training. The 3 frigates formed a triangle around 1 Krell vessel and fired from 3 different angles simultaneously. The Krell ship's shields were designed to protect against attacks from 1 or 2 directions, but not from 3 at once. The shields collapsed and the Krell hull took direct hits that tore through armor and destroyed critical systems. Commander Paul Hendricks on the destroyer, Relentless, demonstrated why humans had become experts at electronic warfare. His ship broadcast false sensor data that made the Krell targeting systems think the human vessels were in different positions than they actually occupied. Krell missiles chased phantom targets while human weapons found real ones. 2 Krell ships collided with each other because their navigation systems were feeding them incorrect position data for nearby vessels. The Iron Resolve simply overwhelmed everything it aimed at with raw firepower that was terrifying to witness. Admiral Cooper's battleship had enough weapons to outfit 3 smaller vessels, and all of them fired in devastating salvos. 1 Krell warship took a direct hit from the Iron Resolve's main cannons and simply ceased to exist in any meaningful way. What remained was scattered debris and frozen atmosphere venting into space. The battle lasted 47 minutes from the moment the human reinforcements arrived until the last Krell ship either surrendered or was disabled. When it ended, 14 Krell warships were either destroyed or crippled beyond the ability to fight. 6 had been defeated by Jake's single ship during the first engagement, and 8 more fell to the human fleet. The human forces had taken damage across multiple vessels, but not a single ship was lost. Jake watched it all from the Valiant Dawn and felt something shift in his understanding of humanity's place in the galaxy. His species had been playing nice for 50 years because they were new and wanted to fit in with the established powers. But now the mask was off and the galaxy was seeing what humans could really do when they decided to fight. Vexthor's ship was one of the few still intact, and he sent a communication requesting terms of surrender. Admiral Cooper denied the request with words that would be quoted in military academies for generations to come. "There are no terms," Cooper said. "You attacked people under human protection. You ignored warnings and chose violence. Now you limp home and you tell your Dominion what happened here today. Tell them the Veshan are not alone anymore. Tell them humanity keeps its promises and pays its debts. Tell them that the next time Krell ships threaten our friends, we won't be satisfied with just driving you off." The surviving Krell vessels withdrew and the human fleet let them go. Admiral Cooper sent medical teams to help the Veshan transport and engineers to repair any damage it had sustained. Then he opened a channel to Galactic Council headquarters on Centrum Prime and sent a message that would shake the foundations of galactic politics. "This is Admiral Frank Cooper representing the United Earth Government," he said into the recording. "I am formally notifying the Galactic Council that humanity is extending a protection pact to the Veshan Collective effective immediately. Any aggression toward the Veshan will be considered an act of war against humanity. We are not asking for permission or approval. We are informing you as a courtesy. The vote can recognize this reality or ignore it, but either way the protection stands." Jake smiled as he listened to those words. The galaxy was about to learn that humans remembered their friends, and they had very long memories indeed. The Galactic Council chamber on Centrum Prime erupted into chaos 3 days after the battle at Treshkai. The massive circular room held representatives from 47 different species, and every single one of them had an opinion about what humanity had done. The chamber was designed to be impressive with soaring ceilings and holographic displays that showed star maps and data feeds from across known space. Right now, those displays showed footage of the battle and the wreckage of 14 Krell warships. Ambassador Nicole Foster stood at the human delegation's platform and watched the chaos with calm eyes. She was a woman in her early 50s with dark skin and black hair touched with gray. She had been a diplomat for 20 years and had served as humanity's voice on the council for the last 5. She had seen the council debate endlessly about problems while doing nothing to solve them, and now she was about to force them to confront reality. The Krell ambassador, Thexlar was a massive warrior even larger than Vexthor had been. His scales were darker and covered with ritual scars that showed his rank in Krell society. He stood at his platform with rage barely controlled in his yellow eyes as he addressed the council. The humans have committed an act of unprovoked aggression against legitimate Krell military operations, Thexlar said, and his voice was like gravel grinding. They destroyed 14 warships and killed hundreds of Krell warriors. This violation of sovereignty demands immediate sanctions and reparations. Several council members voiced agreement while others remained silent. The Torgan representative, a slug-like being who controlled vast mining operations, spoke up in support of the Krell. The Dravik's ambassador, a crystalline entity that communicated through light pulses, also sided with demanding human accountability. These were species that had benefited from the old system where the strong preyed on the weak without consequence. But other voices spoke differently. The Delphian ambassador, representing an aquatic species that had suffered from raiders for centuries, asked a simple question that cut through the rhetoric. Were the Krell ships engaged in lawful activity when the humans intervened? Thexlar bristled at the question. We were claiming salvage rights over a disabled vessel, as is our custom. The Veshan ship was not disabled, Nicole said, and her voice carried across the chamber. It was a functioning transport under attack by 12 warships. Your commander demanded the cargo and passengers as slaves. We have the communication logs. The chamber went quiet as those logs were displayed for all to see. Vexthor's words were there in the official record, demanding surrender and threatening to take the Veshan crew as property. The Krell claimed many things were their ancient rights, but even the council had rules against outright slavery of member species. The council arbiter, a wise old being from the eldest race who had been mediating galactic disputes for 3 centuries, called for order. His species looked like trees with faces, and his voice was slow and thoughtful. The question before us is whether humanity has the authority to extend protection to another species without council approval. They do not, Thexlar said immediately. Such actions require council vote and majority approval. The humans acted outside their authority and must face consequences. Nicole had been waiting for this moment. She requested permission to address the council formally, and the arbiter granted it. She stepped forward to the central speaking platform where her image was projected large enough for everyone to see. She had prepared this speech carefully because she knew it would define humanity's relationship with the galaxy for generations to come. Honorable council members, Nicole began, and her tone was respectful but firm. Humanity has been part of this council for 50 years. In that time, we have watched and learned how galactic civilization operates. We have seen the endless debates and careful procedures. We have observed how thoroughly you discuss every issue. She paused and pulled up data on the holographic displays. We have also seen 147 distress calls from Veshan vessels in the past decade. The average council response time to those calls was 14 hours. The average time before a Veshan ship was destroyed or captured by raiders was 3 hours. This is a mathematical certainty that your procedures guarantee the deaths of those you claim to protect. The chamber stirred uncomfortably as species confronted data they had ignored. Nicole continued without mercy. 50 years ago, humanity sent a colony ship called the New Horizon into space. That ship suffered catastrophic failure, and 20,000 humans were going to die. The council was notified, but your nearest vessel was weeks away. Nicole played the recording that Jake had used. The old footage showed the Veshan medical frigate Gentle Wings approaching the crippled human colony ship. A Veshan captain spoke in broken English learned from humanity's first contact packages. His words were simple and clear. We help because it is right. No payment needed. Life is precious. The recording showed Veshan crew members working alongside desperate human engineers for 3 weeks. It showed Veshan medics treating sick human children. It showed the moment when the New Horizon's engines came back online and the human captain tried to offer payment only to have the Veshan refuse. The Veshan saved 20,000 human lives and asked for nothing in return. Nicole said, and her voice carried emotion now. They diverted from their own critical supply run. They shared their limited resources. They did this because they believed it was the right thing to do, not because of council procedures or political calculations. Because life is precious, she looked around the chamber at all the different species. Now those same Veshan need help, and the council wants to debate procedures and authority. You want to discuss whether humanity has the right to protect our friends. You want to know if we followed the proper forms. Nicole's next words would be quoted in history books. Humanity does not ask permission to honor our debts. We are informing the Council as a courtesy. The Veshan are under human protection starting immediately, and that protection is not negotiable. The Council can recognize this reality or ignore it, but either way the protection stands. The chamber exploded with arguments. Some species called it outrageous, while others quietly admired the boldness. The Krell delegation demanded an immediate vote to censure humanity and impose sanctions. The arbiter called for calm, and eventually order was restored enough for the formal debate to continue. Ambassador Foster listened to hours of arguments from species who benefited from the old system of might making right. She heard speeches about sovereignty and proper procedure. She heard warnings that humanity was setting dangerous precedents. She let them all speak, and she noted which species supported which positions. Finally, when the debate had exhausted itself, the arbiter called for a vote on recognizing humanity's protection pact with the Veshan. The vote was close, with many abstentions from species that didn't want to take a position. In the end, the protection pact was recognized by a narrow margin of 3 votes. Thexelar stood and pointed at Nicole with one clawed finger. This is not over. The Krell Dominion will remember this insult. Nicole met his gaze without flinching. Good, remember it well. Remember what happens when you threaten species under human protection. Share that memory with anyone who thinks about following your path. The council session ended, and Nicole walked out of the chamber knowing that everything had changed. Humanity had been the polite newcomers for 50 years, but now they had shown teeth. The question was what would happen next. She got her answer when she returned to the human embassy and found 73 requests for meetings waiting for her. 17 were from smaller species asking about protection pacts. 20 were from major powers warning against human expansion. The rest were from various factions trying to understand what humanity's real intentions were. Deputy Ambassador Kyle Stevens looked at the pile of requests and whistled. We've certainly gotten their attention. That was the idea, Nicole said. We spent 50 years being ignored. Now they'll have to take us seriously. Cultural Liaison Officer Megan Price pulled up reports from across the galaxy. It's not just the Council. Word is spreading through every sector. Species that have been raided for generations are talking about humanity like we're heroes. The major powers are calling emergency sessions to discuss the implications. Nicole sat down at her desk and looked at the star map on her wall. Somewhere out there, Admiral Cooper's fleet was stationed in Veshan space, making humanity's commitment visible and real. Jake Morrison was receiving a commendation for his actions, even though he had technically violated engagement protocols by fighting such bad odds. A message came through from Earth, and Nicole read it with satisfaction. The human government was authorizing her to negotiate protection pacts with other species on a case-by-case basis. They were also deploying additional fleet assets to sectors where human friends might need help. Humanity was going all in on this new policy. On the planet Treshkai, far below the political debates, something simpler was happening. Jake Morrison stood in a Veshan garden meeting with an elderly Veshan named Shalves. She had been captain of the Gentle Wings 50 years ago, and now she was a matriarch of her people. Her carapace had dulled with age, but her compound eyes were still sharp. You did not need to do this, Shalva said in her clicking language that Jake's translator rendered into English. We gave aid freely without expectation of payment. Jake smiled at the old Veshan who had saved his grandmother's life. Maybe that's not how your people think. But humans believe that debts of honor must be repaid. You gave us help when we were helpless. Now we ensure you'll never be helpless again. Shalvis was quiet for a moment. You have changed the galaxy with your actions. The powerful will not easily accept this new order. Then they'll learn to accept it, or they'll learn what happens when they don't, Jake said. Either way, the Veshan will never stand alone again. That's the human way. 6 months passed after the battle at Treshkai, and the galaxy found itself transformed in ways that nobody had predicted. The change started slowly, like water seeping through cracks, but then it became a flood that reshaped the entire political landscape. Ambassador Nicole Foster sat in her office on Centrum Prime, reviewing reports from across known space and marveling at how quickly everything had shifted. 17 smaller species had formally requested protection pacts with humanity in the months following the Veshan Agreement. Nicole and her team, including Deputy Ambassador Kyle Stevens and Cultural Liaison Officer Megan Price, carefully reviewed each request. They weren't interested in building an empire or collecting tribute. They wanted to identify species that had helped humanity over the years and were now vulnerable to the predatory powers that dominated the galaxy. 4 species were accepted into formal protection agreements. The Delphian Collective was an aquatic civilization that had shared crucial water purification technology with early human colonies on ocean worlds. The Quartz Confederation consisted of crystalline beings who had taught human scientists new methods of energy storage that revolutionized battery technology. The Skyborn clans were avian people who had rescued 3 human exploration teams from hostile environments over the past 2 decades. The gentlefolk of Rix Prime were peaceful mammalian herbivores who had provided sanctuary to human refugees during the brief war with the Zendari raiders. Each species had rendered meaningful aid to humanity, and each now faced threats from more aggressive neighbors. Human warships began appearing in their territories with the same message that Admiral Frank Cooper had delivered at Treshkai. These people were under human protection, and anyone who threatened them would answer to Earth's military forces. The Krell Dominion initially planned massive retaliation for the humiliation they suffered. Thexelar returned to his homeworld and urged the Krell High Command to launch a full-scale invasion of human space. He argued that allowing this insult to stand would make the Krell look weak to other species. War councils were held and battle fleets were assembled, but then something unexpected happened. Several species that the Krell had dominated for generations saw opportunity in humanity's actions. The Prith, a reptilian race that had been Krell subjects for 3 centuries, sent a secret delegation to Nicole requesting human assistance in gaining independence. 2 other subject species made similar requests. The Krell suddenly faced a choice between attacking humanity and risking their entire empire falling apart from internal rebellions. Their aggressive neighbors who might have supported them in a war against the humans were hesitant now because they had their own subject species watching events carefully. If the Krell Empire crumbled, it might start a chain reaction. Commander Vextor survived the battle at Treshkai and returned to Krell space as a broken warrior. He had lost his command and his honor in Krell society, but in a private conversation with his clan leader that was secretly recorded and leaked to galactic media, he spoke words that changed how many species viewed humanity. "I have seen them fight," Vextor said, and his voice carried none of his former arrogance. "They do not battle for glory or conquest like proper warriors. They fight like they are settling accounts in a ledger. Every move is calculated. Every shot has a purpose. They are not warriors seeking honor. They are accountants of violence, and their books always balance in the end." The recording spread across the galaxy, and suddenly species that had dismissed humans as weak newcomers began reassessing their positions. The term accountants of violence caught on and became how many alien civilizations described human military doctrine. It was meant as an insult, but humans wore it as a badge of honor. The galactic economy began shifting in response to these new political realities. Species under human protection suddenly became much safer trade partners because raiders and pirates avoided them. Cargo ships that had traveled in armed convoys could now move with minimal escorts through human-protected space. Insurance rates dropped for companies doing business with Vaitian or Delphian merchants. The Galactic Council found its authority challenged in ways it had never experienced. For thousands of years, the Council had been the center of galactic civilization, even if it was often ineffective. Now species were making protection agreements outside Council oversight, and the Council couldn't do anything about it. Some Council members grumbled about human overreach, but others quietly admired what humanity had accomplished. On Earth, the human government struggled with the implications of their expanded commitments. Defense Secretary Laura Bennett sat in meetings reviewing deployment schedules and budget projections. Protecting multiple species across dozens of star systems required resources and personnel. The Earth Defense Fleet was expanding rapidly, but there were limits to how fast ships could be built and crews could be trained. Bennett met with Admiral Helen Carter to discuss the challenges. "We've made promises to 5 different species now. Can we actually keep all these commitments if things go wrong?" Admiral Carter looked at the strategic map showing human fleet positions across the galaxy. "We're stretched thin, but not dangerously so. The key is that we don't actually have to fight most of the time. The threat of human intervention is enough to deter most aggressors. They've seen what happened to the Krell and they don't want to be next." "But what if someone calls our bluff?" Bennett asked. "What if a major power decides to test us? Then we show them it's not a bluff," Carter said simply. We honor our commitments or the whole system falls apart. That's the foundation we've built this new order on. Jake Morrison was promoted to Commodore and given command of a small fleet tasked with patrolling Veshan space. His flagship was a new cruiser called the Defender, and his crew included many of the officers who had served with him on the Valiant Dawn. Greg Patterson was now his executive officer, and Amy Richardson commanded the science division for the entire patrol group. Jake spent his time ensuring that Veshan ships could travel safely through space that had been dangerous for generations. His fleet responded to distress calls and investigated suspicious vessels. Most raiders took one look at human warships and decided to find easier prey elsewhere. The few who didn't learn quickly why that was a mistake. One evening, Jake returned to Treshkai and met again with matriarch Shalves, Aewi, in her garden. The old Veshan welcomed him with the clicking sounds that his translator rendered as warm greetings. They walked among crystalline flowers that chimed softly in the breeze. "Your people have changed the galaxy," Shalvis said as they walked. "The strong no longer prey on the weak without consequence. That is a remarkable achievement." "We just repaid a debt," Jake said. "Your people saved my grandmother and 19,999 others. We couldn't let you face threats alone after that." Shalvis was quiet for a moment. "But do your people understand what they have begun? The galaxy's powerful civilizations built their strength on the backs of weaker species. They will not easily accept a new order where protection is given freely to those who need it." Jake looked up at the stars beginning to appear in Treshkai's evening sky. Somewhere up there, human warships patrolled to keep these people safe. Across the galaxy, other human fleets did the same for species that had shown kindness to humanity when it mattered. "We understand what we've started," Jake said, "and we're ready for whatever comes next. The galaxy can accept that some species protect others not for profit, but for principle. Or they can test us and discover how far humans will go to honor our debts." He turned to look at the elderly Veshan who had saved his grandmother's life so many years ago. Either way, the Veshan will never stand alone again. Neither will the Delphian or the Quartz or the Skyborn or the Gentlefolk. That's the promise humanity has made, and we keep our promises. That's just the human way. As Jake's shuttle lifted off from Treshkai and climbed toward orbit, Earth Defense Command received 17 new distress calls from across the galaxy. Each call came from desperate species who had heard the stories about humans who honored debts and protected the weak. Each message ended with the same phrase spoken in halting English by people who had nowhere else to turn. "Requesting human assistance. We have no one else." Admiral Carter looked at the incoming requests and knew they stood at a crossroads. Humanity had come to the stars seeking knowledge and peaceful coexistence with other species. Instead, they found a galaxy where might made right and kindness was exploited as weakness. They found civilizations that debated endlessly while the vulnerable suffered. So humanity did what humans do best. They adapted and they acted. They remembered who had helped them, and they repaid those debts with interest. They stood between the strong and the weak and dared the predators to try getting past them. They proved that protection could be offered not for tribute or control, but simply because it was the right thing to do. The galaxy would never be the same because humanity had rewritten the rules. One protection pact at a time, one battle at a time, one debt repaid at a time. The old powers could accept this new reality, or they could test humanity's resolve and learn the hard way what it meant when humans decided to honor their obligations. Either way, the weak were no longer helpless, and the strong were learning to fear the accountants of violence who kept perfect ledgers and always balanced their books. The galaxy was learning that when humanity made a promise, they kept it. When humanity owed a debt, they repaid it. And when humanity decided to protect someone, heaven help anyone foolish enough to get in their way. That was the human way, and the galaxy was shaking in fear because of it.